Ladies and gentlemen, there comes a point in life when you've got to stop blaming others for the way they treat you and start asking yourself, what energy am I putting out? Because every woman carries a certain power, a value that can't be bought, faked, or borrowed. It's spiritual, it's emotional, it's something that radiates from within. But the truth is, sometimes, without even realizing it, you start giving pieces of that power away. You start lowering your own worth to fit into spaces that were never meant to hold your greatness. See, the way a man sees you isn't just about how you look. It's about how you move, how you speak, how you respect yourself when nobody's watching. It's about the standard you live by when love gets tested. Too many queens have been taught to chase validation instead of standing in purpose. Too many hearts have been broken not because they weren't enough, but because they forgot what being enough really meant. You've got to understand something. Your value doesn't shrink just because someone fails to see it. But it does fade when you start doubting it yourself. The moment you begin to tolerate disrespect, silence your needs, or pretend you're okay with less than you deserve, that's when the foundation starts to crack. And that's what this message is about. The silent ways you might be killing your value in front of a man without even noticing. Because when you know your worth, you move differently. You don't chase energy, you attract it. You don't beg for love, you embody it. And when you walk in faith, when you remember that God didn't create you to settle but to shine, you start to command a different kind of respect. This isn't about playing games or manipulating anyone's attention. This is about elevation, about becoming the kind of woman whose presence speaks before she even says a word. The kind of woman who makes a man rise to meet her standard, not sink to test her patience. So tonight we're going to talk about it. The 4 things that silently strip away your power, your peace, and your value in front of a man. Because once you see them for what they are, you'll never let anyone, not even love, make you forget who you are again. When you lose yourself to please him, you start walking a path that leads you further away from who you really are. It begins subtly, almost quietly. You compromise a little here, you hold your tongue there. You bend your boundaries just a bit because you think love demands sacrifice. You tell yourself it's just part of keeping the peace, of being understanding, of showing you care. But over time, that constant bending becomes breaking, and you start noticing that you don't recognize yourself anymore. Your ladder doesn't sound the same, your dreams don't feel as big, and your reflection in the mirror starts looking like someone you used to know. You give so much of yourself hoping he'll see your worth, not realizing that every time you abandon a piece of who you are, you're teaching him that your needs don't matter. You stop dressing the way that makes you feel confident because he prefers something else. You hold back your opinions because you don't want to upset him. You shrink your light so his ego can shine a little brighter. That's not love, that's self-erasure. And the more you do it, the more he stops seeing you as the woman he admired in the beginning, the one with fire in her spirit, the one who stood tall in her truth. Because men don't truly value what comes too easy. And when you start giving all of yourself without balance, you lose the very mystery, strength, and self-respect that made him fall for you in the first place. Love isn't about losing yourself. It's about growing together while staying grounded in your individuality. But when your entire world starts to revolve around pleasing him, you create a one-sided love that drains instead of fulfills. He starts expecting your sacrifices as the norm, not the exception. He stops working for your affection because you've already given it without requiring effort or respect in return. And before you know it, you've built a relationship where your silence is mistaken for agreement, your tolerance is mistaken for weakness, and your unconditional love becomes conditional survival. The moment you silence your inner voice to keep someone else comfortable, you're no longer living in alignment with your purpose. Because real love doesn't require you to disappear. It asks you to show up fully, to be seen, to be heard, to be valued. But when you trade authenticity for acceptance, you rob yourself of the joy that comes from being loved for who you truly are, not who you pretend to be. Accepting less than you deserve is one of the quietest ways you destroy your own value in front of a man. It doesn't happen overnight. It's a slow erosion of self-worth that starts with small compromises that feel harmless. You overlook a comment that made you uncomfortable. You excuse behavior that disrespects you. You settle for half effort because at least he's still around. You convince yourself that maybe this is what love is supposed to feel like: imperfect, complicated, painful at times. But deep down, something in your spirit starts to ache because you know this isn't what you were created for. You were built to be cherished, not tolerated. Yet, you keep lowering your standards because you fear that raising them will make you lose him. So you begin to normalize the bare minimum, and before long, you start believing that it's the best you can get. That's how many women end up stuck in cycles of emotional starvation, where attention becomes a substitute for effort and temporary affection is mistaken for love. When you accept less, You tell the world that you're willing to settle, and that energy attracts more of the same. You can't manifest a king when you've already made peace with being treated like an option. You start rearranging your expectations to fit his limitations, thinking that if you love harder, he'll give more. But the truth is, when you accept less, he learns he can give less. And slowly, you start to disappear under the weight of your own tolerance. Every time you let something slide that violates your worth, you chip away at your own self-respect. Love that makes you question your value isn't love, it's bondage dressed as comfort. You start shrinking your voice, ignoring your intuition, pretending you're fine because admitting otherwise feels like failure. But deep down, you know that staying in spaces where you are undervalued teaches others that you don't see your own value. The standard you set for yourself becomes the blueprint for how others treat you. When you start demanding less out of fear of losing him, you lose the very essence of what makes you worthy of more. And that's how it happens, not with one big decision, but with countless small moments where you choose fear over faith, comfort over courage, familiarity over fulfillment. Because accepting less than you deserve doesn't just hurt your heart, it silences your spirit and convinces you to settle for a life that's smaller than the one God designed for you. Chasing validation instead of purpose is one of the most dangerous traps a woman can fall into because it shifts her entire focus from being fulfilled to being approved. When you start living for his attention instead of your own alignment, you slowly begin to trade peace for performance. You start asking yourself, am I enough for him? Instead of asking, is this connection aligned with who I'm becoming? You find yourself checking your phone for his messages, analyzing every word he says, trying to decode his silence, as if your worth depends on his acknowledgement. It's a chase that never ends because validation is a moving target. The more you seek it, the more it escapes you. When your happiness becomes dependent on how he sees you, you give him control over your confidence. And soon you start molding yourself into whatever version of you gets the most approval, even if it means losing the version that's most authentic. You start over-giving, over-explaining, over-apologizing, all in hopes that he'll see your effort and give you the love you're starving for. But true love isn't earned through desperation, it flows naturally from mutual respect and recognition. When you chase validation, you create a power imbalance that leaves you feeling small, anxious, and unseen. You stop living with intention and start living for reaction. Everything becomes a performance. The way you talk, dress, smile, carefully curated to keep his interest, even when your soul is exhausted from pretending. And the most painful part is that even when you get his attention, it never feels like enough, because external validation can't fill an internal void. That void is meant to be filled with purpose, faith, and self-love, the kind that doesn't fade when someone walks away. When your purpose drives you, you move differently. You don't chase love, you attract it. You don't beg for validation, you command respect. You no longer base your worth on someone's inconsistency because your value is rooted in something unshakable. But when your worth depends on someone's praise, their silence feels like rejection and their approval feels like oxygen. That's why so many women lose themselves in relationships, because they've confused being chosen with being valued. Chasing validation keeps you in a constant state of emotional hunger, always waiting for crumbs of affection that never satisfy the soul. But when you shift your focus back to your purpose, you stop running after what's temporary and start building what's eternal. You remember that you weren't created to be someone's validation project. You were created to be a vessel of strength, grace, and divine worth. Ignoring red flags out of fear of being alone is one of the most painful ways a woman betrays her own heart. It begins when loneliness whispers that having someone, even the wrong one, is better than having no one at all. So you start rationalizing what you know in your spirit isn't right. You tell yourself he's just stressed, that he'll change, that his inconsistency is just a phase. But deep down, you know what your intuition is trying to tell you. Those moments when his actions don't match his words, when your heart feels uneasy, when peace starts leaving your body every time you're around him. Those are not coincidences, they are warnings. But when the fear of being alone outweighs your faith in what you deserve, you start negotiating with those red flags as if love can be built on denial. You cling to potential instead of reality, hoping that if you love him hard enough, your love will heal him. But you can't heal a man who isn't ready to face himself, and you can't save someone who's comfortable watching you drown in their chaos. You start adjusting your standards to match his behavior, convincing yourself that love means patience when really it's turning into self-abandonment. And that's how it happens. You start silencing the voice inside that says, this isn't right, because you'd rather endure dysfunction than face solitude. But loneliness isn't the enemy, settling is. Loneliness can teach you self-love, strength, and clarity. Settling teaches you how to forget who you are. When you ignore red flags, you teach a man that you'll tolerate what should have been a deal breaker. You teach him that disrespect will be met with forgiveness instead of distance. You teach him that you'll stay no matter how many boundaries he crosses, because your fear of losing him is stronger than your faith in yourself. And every time you ignore what you feel, you lose a piece of your power. You start existing in a relationship that drains your joy while convincing yourself that love requires pain. But real love isn't supposed to hurt like that. It's not supposed to make you question your worth or keep you in a constant state of anxiety. Ignoring the signs doesn't make them disappear. It just delays the heartbreak that's already waiting. Because love that costs you your peace isn't love, it's bondage. And the longer you ignore the red flags, the more you'll forget what healthy love is supposed to feel like. The truth is, being alone isn't a punishment, it's preparation. It's the space where you rediscover your value, where you remember that you don't need to settle for survival when God called you to thrive in love. Forgetting your worth when love gets tested is the moment your heart starts to drift from its power. It's easy to feel confident when everything is going right, when the messages are sweet, when he's consistent, when you feel chosen. But the real test of your worth comes when love starts to feel uncertain, when the person you care about begins to pull away, when words don't match actions, and the security you once felt begins to shake. That's when many women start questioning themselves instead of the situation. You start asking, what did I do wrong? Instead of asking, what changed? You start blaming yourself for his silence, for his distance, for his confusion. You start trying harder, giving more, loving deeper, all while feeling emptier inside. But love was never meant to make you doubt your value. When you forget your worth, you start accepting treatment that contradicts your spirit. You start overcompensating to prove you're worthy of staying, not realizing that anyone who truly values you will never make you beg for their consistency. You start confusing effort with desperation, thinking that if you love enough, sacrifice enough, forgive enough, you'll make them see your value again. But love isn't about convincing someone to see what's already clear. It's about walking in the confidence that you bring something sacred to the table, your loyalty, your peace, your heart. When you forget that, you begin to settle for emotional crumbs, thinking they're enough to sustain you. But every time you accept less, you teach your heart to tolerate pain in the name of love. Forgetting your worth turns you into someone who stays when they should walk away, who gives when they should rest, who loves others more than they love themselves. And the most dangerous part is that the longer you forget, the harder it becomes to remember. You start thinking that love always feels this way, heavy, uncertain, one-sided. But real love aligns with peace, not confusion. It makes you feel safe, not small. It builds you, it doesn't break you. When you start to remember your worth again, you stop allowing moments of pain to define your identity. You stop chasing clarity from people who thrive in confusion. You stop tying your value to someone's ability to love you right, because your worth was never dependent on how someone else sees you. It was established long before you ever met them. The test of love isn't about how much you can endure. It's about how much you can honor yourself while enduring it. The moment you remember that, you start moving from a place of strength instead of fear, and that's when everything in your world begins to change.